Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
I'm friend and guest Alan Singer.
Dr. Alan Singer is an educator, historian who is eminently qualified to be with us since we're going to be talking about anniversaries. And some of these anniversaries are worth noting. All of them are worth noting. The question is, how much positive spin can we get out of these anniversaries moving forward? And we're all music fans in this particular Zoom room of panels. And so 1971, Marvin Gaye came out with one of the all-time classic albums called What's Going On. If I remember, that was the actual title of it, right? What's Going On. I know that was one of the songs. I do believe that was the album. And within the context of that album, it was a concept album. And the concept album was what was going on in the world that was affecting the Black community. Pretty much you could hear interconnected, multiple voices on many of those tracks. But one of the lines that stuck out for me was trigger happy policing. Trigger happy policing was a rallying cry in 1971. And here we are in 2021, and we are still dealing with trigger happy policing. And unfortunately, because we know the long historical arc of trigger happy policing, we can use that to segue into another 50th anniversary, right? The 50th anniversary. We're taping on a Wednesday, I believe, September 15th. We're going to air the following Monday, September 20th. And just 2 days ago, the 13th of September, wrapped up the conclusion of the rebellion at Attica. And basically, it was a prison uprising that was basically a rebellion against inhumane circumstances that the prisoners were enduring. And so on the 13th, Governor Rockefeller, after his conversations with President Nixon, then President Nixon, decided he was going to take back the prison. And that 50th anniversary is basically two days ago from when we're taping. And the bad thing about that anniversary is we know that 50 years after the Attica riots, things didn't get better. It got worse because we're saddled with mass incarceration. And the bulk of those prisoners in the mass incarceration are Black and brown people. And the bulk of them are there because of the war on drugs, which actually grew out of the same Governor Rockefeller's, we're going to crack down on these drug dealers, and we're no longer going to be thinking in terms of light sentences. It's going to be life for dealers, et cetera, et cetera. Alan, you could probably tell us more about the historical arc of that war on drugs.
Well, in 1968, Richard Nixon gets elected, launching what he calls the Southern Strategy. But basically, it's an appeal to white racism as a backlash against the African-American civil rights movement. Nixon gets elected, and all of a sudden, with politicians, instead of addressing the problems of poverty that are afflicting inner cities, that had been outlined by the Kerner Commission report, all of a sudden, everybody's getting tough on crime. And Rockefeller, who has presidential ambitions, decides to institute his own war on crime, and really, it becomes a war on Black people. So Rockefeller institutes laws and police procedures that just begin to fill the jails with young African-American men. So the United States stops addressing the causes of the conditions and now has a money-making institution putting young Black men in jail. But they don't have the facilities. Instead, they crowd people in. They don't feed them. They don't provide medical care. They don't provide education. We call these institutions that are supposed to change people.
In 71.
Yeah, but they're not changing anybody. They're punishing people.
The interesting thing about it, it was so bad in 71, in September of 71, that the prisoners finally said enough is enough. So there was a fight between prisoners and guards, and that turned into the actual Attica riot. They took guards as hostages, and they demanded to talk to the governor. And of course, he refused to go talk to them. But the thing lasted for 4 or 5 days, from like the 9th to the 13th, something to that effect. And within the context of that, a number of people lost their lives. And the initial reports, unfortunately, were bogus. As much as there were press coverage all around Attica, there were very few people getting inside that prison. And so rampant rumors were, well, they've got hostages and they're slashing the throats of the hostages. Matter of fact, even the network news that should have been more judicious, they were just regurgitating some of that stuff. Bob, you have an example of at least one, but we know they all were.
Right. I mean, and you're right, Eric, the reporting, I remember it as a student going through public school, hearing about the hostages being taken, the riot at Attica. And for those who are younger, you have to understand this wasn't, New York was awash in drug crime at the time. So, I mean, when it came afterwards, it was an easy sell to get tough on them. But going back to Attica, yeah, journalists like Harry Reasoner, who's one of the legendary anchors on CBS and ABC, even he reported at first that black inmates had killed white guards. That's as he reported it. I'm going to try to cue it up as we continue speaking, but it came out of his mouth, and you have to understand, it was believable. That's what the public heard, that the inmates killed the guards. So right. Yes, and of course it turned out later, I'll let you or Alan explain, that was not the case as I look for the video.
Well, while you're trying to cue it up, it's interesting because I was on an assignment desk for ABC News when all this was breaking. And one of my good friends and colleagues was sent to Attica by ABC News. You guys remember John Johnson. He later became an anchor at WABC, but John had transitioned from the documentary unit to become an on-camera reporter for the network. And that was one of his earlier assignments. And he was up there. And that's why Harry Reasoner should have actually, before coming out with whatever copy that was, he should have been trying to talk to John Johnson, because John is one of the few reporters the inmates wanted to try to get their information to. And John was inside that prison, and he was having interactions, and a lot of his stuff was not showing up and not popping into the broadcast as they should have. That's another behind the scenes story that I would, after all these years, I have to go
71.
back and double check with John. It took one of our couriers to pull somebody's
probably for different reasons.
This guy's got stuff that's not getting on the air. And so, yeah, they fell down on the job when they could have actually risen above at the time. And it wasn't John's fault. I can say that without contradiction.
and let me just share this quickly. It's a very short clip. And this is exactly as it was reported on ABC that night. It's just a few seconds.
Because of news like this.
In the final hours of the revolt, led primarily by blacks, the inmates murdered 9 of their white hostages.
That's as it was reported by Harry Reasoner. And that was not the case.
Yeah, and I don't want to badmouth Harry Reasoner, because guess what? No. He wasn't the only one coming out with that report. As
no, he was reading the wire reports. He was reading what was being actually sent out by the government, press relations officials. So I don't blame him, but that's as America heard it.
Yeah.
What we later learned is that the guards who died were murdered by police snipers who indiscriminately just raked the yard with bullets. And this was under the order of Governor Rockefeller, so he could one-up Richard Nixon. Eric, you were talking about that conversation between Nixon and Rockefeller before.
Yeah, the tapes came out because a young lady, a historian, I believe, from University of Michigan, went back and started digging into all the secret stuff that had been covered up. And believe me, there were lots of Attica cover-ups. And years later, it came out that they lied. They claimed that the inmates had slashed throats. And Bob, you might be able to find that headline that finally contradicted that. They claimed that the inmates had killed their hostages, etc. It turned out when she dug into all those files, and I'm sorry I didn't keep that handy so I could call her name. It was a phenomenal book. I think it was called Blood in the Water. My memory says that was the title of the book. But she dug into it. She talked to a lot of the survivors of the riot, from inmates to families, guards, and the whole bit. It turned out the inmates killed 3 of their own and 1 hostage, and the rest of those hostages were shot by Rockefeller's state police, who he commanded to take control of this prison. And see, not knives, shots. And those shots were the sniper fires. And the conversation between Richard Nixon and Rockefeller was something to the effect that, yeah, well, it was kind of not the best thing. He said, well, things like that, accidents do happen. That's the gist of the conversation between Richard Nixon and Nelson Rockefeller. And Rockefeller, after the Attica, and you're right, Alan, he still wanted to be a presidential candidate in '76. So after Attica in '73 is when he was meeting with his people and saying, we're going to lay down the law. He hadn't learned anything from Attica. And that's when he said life sentences for drug pushers, life sentences for anybody caught with any amount of drugs, et cetera, et cetera. 3 strikes, you're out. The draconian drug laws that he instituted in the state of New York as his way of becoming the law and order candidate for the '76 campaign is what we have inherited today. That war on drugs initiated with Rockefeller, and it was picked up and carried by Tricky Dick Nixon all the way to the goalpost that we're regretting today.
And Eric, like I was saying before, it was an easy sell in the '70s because cities like New York were just ravaged by drug crime. If it wasn't the people mugging people on the sidewalks, it was the gang wars going on in the streets. So the sellability was at a high rate, to get these people.
Easy to sell. Yes,
yeah.
Easy to sell.
The historian was Heather Ann Thompson, University.
Fantastic. That's her. Yep. Give us the full title of the book, Alan.
Just Blood in the Water.
Blood in the Water, the full blah, blah, blah about the Attica investigations and cover up or whatever. I forget. I know it was a good subtitle.
Let me find this. I have it here. It's
Not to worry.
The Uprising of 1971 and its legacy.
And its legacy. Okay. Yeah. And there were some other books that came out afterwards that she may have done a follow-up that talked about the actual cover, or another historian went back and said, great book, there's more we haven't even gotten. And they went and dug into all those archives and came up with all the cover-up stuff. But the interesting thing is, as we well know, policing in this country harks back to the entire historical arc of the white supremacist nature of how the country was founded. And so the legacy of slavery and legacy of slave catchers are what actually permeates policing in this country. So trigger happy policing didn't start with Marvin Gaye. It started back in colonial times. So Alan, talk to us, because we know the other anniversary we need to mark is the 30th anniversary of the discovery of the New York African burial ground. And what's significant about that is because it reminded people that, guess what? Slavery wasn't just below the Mason-Dixon line. All 13 colonies, including New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, all engaged in slavery and the slave trade. And so the nature of the beast is we need to mark the 30th anniversary of the discovery, the rediscovery of the New York African burial ground, because it was 1991 when that burial ground got unearthed. And it launched an entirely new look at the history of this country, because we had to take another look at slavery, right, Alan?
Well, not only that, one of the things that's so striking, and you said the rediscovery, because historians always knew about it. the burial ground is on 18th century maps of the city of New York.
Mm-hmm.
Because after the revolution, as the city expands, they just basically paved over it and they wrote it out of history.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want it rediscovered. One of the things that happened is when they started excavating for the federal office building, they found human remains. Under laws that were written to protect Native American burial sites, had to be an investigation. And the government originally denied it and they just wanted to build. But the African American community in New York rose up because they said, "What? This is on the maps."
Then I'll be free to travel home, Alan. That's that two-part documentary that deals with the community coming together and saying, guess what? You just unearthed our ancestors. Stop trying to use the coroner's method and shovel those bones out. Follow the federal law. You need to investigate who those people are.
Now,
Eric, please remind people who the director and creator of that film was.
Oh, okay. That was EVT Educational Production, the people who are bringing you this public affairs program in conjunction with Manhattan Neighborhood Network and the good graces of Zoom. But yeah, I did a two-parter video documentary on that rediscovery of the burial ground and the battle to save it. And that's significant. And Alan has done a number of symposia on those early days, and the curriculum that he wrote and edited is New York and Slavery, Complicity and Resistance, Complicity and, yeah. So continue.
Of the burial grounds rediscovery, was the state decided in 1997 it was going to have a curriculum project focusing on New York and the Underground Railroad, New York and the Freedom Trail. And the curriculum, the state never wrote a curriculum. It did establish a commission called the Amistad Commission, which never met and basically is defunct. Now, today there's new discussion of reviving the commission by the New York State Senate. And it's a way of beginning to infuse the history of what took place into the curriculum. But really since 1987, we're looking at what, 14, 17 years, nothing has officially been done by the state. Now, since 2017, New York elected representatives in Congress have pushed for expanding the burial ground and turning it into an international memorial museum. But that is stalled. They reintroduced it this April, but it hasn't gone through yet. And really, that burial ground needs to have the recognition that it deserves so that the public understands what the history of the United States and New York really was.
Okay, so what I'm going to try to do when this airs on Monday the 20th, I hope to be in discussions with the people at the New York African Burial Ground and the city's Human Rights Commission office, because we were trying to do something last year before the pandemic really hit full bore. And we were going to do some rescreenings and some panel discussions about, one, the rediscovery of the burial ground, and two, the significance of it, and what that whole arc of slavery, abolitionism, and all that means to the human rights movement in the 20th, 21st century. And the burial ground was a perfect, because I believe it's also on the World Registry of Significant Places because of the connection to the transatlantic slave trade. And it's also a US historical, national, historical monument. And so we may be able to do a series of screenings and panel discussions. Alan, you might be interested. I think we talked about it. Maybe something will come up, fingers crossed, that we can get something. But one of the things I'm gonna write myself a note to do is to call some of these senators about what they're trying to do, because I did read earlier on that they had moved the Amistad Commission here in New York State out of the Secretary of State's office and put it into the Department of Education.
That was
they had done that. that means they can be doing a heck of a lot more on making sure that curriculum infusion happens, because the Department of State's not going to be caring what's going on in curriculum, but the Department of Education should and would. So let's make a note to ourselves to be talking to some of these state senators about this latest move, Alan. But that brings us to the other anniversary that we do not want to forget, because guess what? Human rights, abolitionist movement, the whole bit about what took place 20 years ago when we're airing is like 5-6 days, September 11th, September 15th. On the 20th, it'll be 9 days after the actual anniversary. But the World Trade Center attack, the Pentagon attack, that's the 20th anniversary, because we know that was 9/11 in 2001. And so that's the other significant anniversary that we need to talk about, because it's impacted exactly where we are democratically as a country. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, bin Laden said he was going to destroy America by attacking America. And he didn't mean he was going to destroy it with bombs and whatever, even though that was his initial target. He meant he was going to destroy America by making America show itself to be not the shining city on the hill. It was going to show itself as what he claimed it was: a white supremacist, godless, whatever. and so that's why he launched his attack. Now, right after the attack, on September 12th, we had the greatest outpouring of patriotism, and we're all in this together, that I've ever seen. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, there wasn't any red America, white America, black America, green America, blue state, red state. On the 12th of September 2001, it was, we're all in this together. And it was, we're going to rise up and we're going to fight back, and we're not going to be defeated. Give me your guys' take on what happened in the intervening 20 years, because we know, talking human rights, I can say for myself, I'm not happy with the phenomenal spike in anti-Asian crime that's occurred in the last 18 months. And it's tied to the pandemic and started in China, but go back to 9/11, right after the attack. I
mean, you're right, Eric. In the days following, it seemed like we had hit this moment of national unity, where we were truly one America against this evil whatever that had attacked New York, would have attacked 2 sites in Washington, if not one plane had gone down.
Symbols of our country, the symbols of our democracy.
Yes. And so we were all together. We were going to do this together, and it didn't matter if you were a Democrat and the president at the time, of course, was Republican. Didn't matter. You were going to be in there working together towards the goal of eradicating those who attacked us. Of course, in the years that followed, we had just pure Muslim hate, pure anti-Muslim hate, I should say, and even people like former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, when years later they tried to build a mosque in Lower Manhattan.
Wasn't that many years after? But yes, they tried to build a mosque, a come together mosque, right?
Right. It was meant to be a let's get together. This is who we are. We are Muslim. We are not hate everybody. This is
we too are Americans, and we want to show this country. Yes.
And Giuliani used the word mosque as if it was a pejorative or a curse word, and just laughed it off, like, you're not bringing a mosque down to Lower Manhattan. No. So that's what happened afterwards.
Anti-mosque demonstrators who came out yelling all kinds of hatred.
Yes.
3 days after 9/11, 9/14, Congress debated a new law, which was demanded by President Bush, authorizing him basically to attack any place in the world in a war on terrorism. And in the congressional vote, in the House of Representatives, I had the exact figure here, voted 420 to 1 to support a counterattack. And the Senate voted 98 to 0.
Yes.
One elected representative in the United States called for us to wait a minute.
Yeah.
And that was Congressional Representative Barbara Lee of California.
Barbara Lee, that's correct. She said, we are rushing into something we don't need to rush into.
She said,
I remember.
oh, we must not rush to judgment, for too many innocent people have already died. Our country is in mourning. If we rush to launch a counterattack, we run too great a risk that women, children, and other non-combatants will be caught in the crossfire. Nor can we let our justified anger over these outrageous acts by vicious murderers inflame prejudice against all Arab Americans, Muslims, Southeast Asians, and any other people because of their race, religion, or ethnicity. Barbara Lee was right 20 years ago. She predicted exactly what would happen. Yeah. She was the only one. People were so blinded by their anger.
And if you read that very next line, Alan, finally, we must be careful not to embark on an open-ended war with neither an exit strategy nor a focused target. And we have about 1.5 minutes left.
And that's exactly what the United States did. In a sense, what bin Laden had hoped for, the United States Congress, Senate, and President endorsed.
Yeah.
And we live with this, we live with the burning, the repercussions of that. I just want to make one other point, and it's about the Attica Rebellion and why it's so important that we look at that anniversary. Today's New York Times had an article on conditions at Rikers Island.
Yeah, we can't read the whole article, but you know what? They call for a total revamping of Rikers.
10 deaths, exhausted guards, rampant violence, why Rikers is in crisis. Conditions on Rikers Islands have deteriorated to which officials say is a humanitarian crisis.
Right.
Prison in the United States and the treatment of African American and Latino men has continued since Attica to this day.
We're out of time, aren't we?
About 30 seconds, about 30 seconds.
The bottom line is these are significant anniversaries. We understand that bin Laden needed to be caught, captured, brought to justice.
Yes.
We lost our focus after we went into Afghanistan. We ended up morphing into a war in Iraq that shouldn't have happened, which we talked about on Media Watch. We said there were no weapons of mass destruction back in 2001, but that's another story for another time. This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. That video clip that I referred to was from a channel called Skipped History. And you can follow us on Media Watch EVT on Twitter and YouTube.
And I'm Alan Singer, guest and friend. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Singer. We'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.